In 2017, one of America's most recognizable fashion brands was sold for more than $2.4 billion. It was another spectacular victory on Wall Street. Investors celebrated, executives celebrated, the fashion industry celebrated. There was just one person who didn't profit from the deal. The woman whose name was on every handbag, Kate Spade. By then, millions of people around the world believed they knew her. They carried her handbags, they wore her designs, they walked into boutiques that proudly displayed her name above the entrance. Yet almost none of them realized something extraordinary. Kate Spade no longer owned Kate Spade. Not the brand, not the trademark, not even the right to use her own name in the fashion business she had helped build. It sounds impossible. How can someone lose ownership of their own name? The answer begins years earlier, long before the billion-dollar headlines, long before luxury boutiques filled shopping districts across the world, long before Kate Spade became one of the most recognizable names in American fashion. It begins with a young woman who never set out to become famous. She wasn't born into wealth. She didn't inherit a fashion empire. She wasn't surrounded by powerful investors or luxury retailers. She simply believed she could design a better handbag. That idea changed everything. Within little more than a decade, she and her husband built one of the fastest-growing fashion brands in America. The success was extraordinary. Customers loved the designs. Retailers couldn't stock them fast enough. Fashion editors praised the fresh, optimistic style that felt completely different from the European luxury houses dominating the market. Then came the offer every entrepreneur dreams about: a chance to sell, a chance to walk away with life-changing wealth. Reports estimate that Kate ultimately received around $124 million from selling the company. For almost anyone else, that would have been the ending. The dream had come true. The founder had won. But some victories don't reveal their true cost until years later. Because the company Kate sold wasn't simply a company. It carried her identity. Every handbag, every shopping bag, every magazine advertisement, every boutique, every label. 2 words: Kate Spade. The moment ownership of the business changed hands, those 2 words changed hands as well. Legally, the transaction was straightforward. Emotionally, it would become one of the most extraordinary paradoxes in modern business. Imagine spending 20 years building a name, then discovering that someone else owns it. Imagine wanting to create again, only to realize you can no longer sign your own work with your own name. Imagine walking past stores displaying your identity in giant letters, while knowing you no longer have any voice inside them. Most people assume this story is about fashion. It isn't. Others believe it's about money. It isn't. At its heart, this is a story about something far more personal: identity. Because somewhere between a small apartment in New York and a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Kate Spade the woman slowly disappeared behind Kate Spade the brand. One kept growing, the other struggled to recognize herself. Years later, the company would still be thriving. Its boutiques would still be busy. Its products would still be sold around the world. But the woman who had made that success possible would be fighting a battle no customer could see. Looking back, it's easy to believe the tragedy began with depression, or with the sale of the company, or with the billion-dollar acquisitions that followed. But perhaps it started much earlier. Perhaps it began with a conversation that lasted only a few minutes. A conversation about what to call a new handbag company. A conversation so ordinary that no one in the room realized it would shape the rest of Kate Spade's life. Because before she sold her company, before she earned $124 million, before the world knew her name, she first had to make one decision, a decision that would eventually make her famous, and years later, leave her watching someone else own the name she had spent a lifetime building. Before Kate Spade became Kate Spade, long before the billion-dollar headlines, before the luxury boutiques, before millions of handbags carried her name, Kate Spade wasn't even Kate Spade. She was Catherine Noel Brosnahan, a young woman growing up in Kansas City, Missouri. It wasn't the kind of place people associated with fashion. There were no famous design houses, no glamorous runways, no celebrity designers walking through the streets. Kansas City produced practical people people who believed in showing up for work, paying their bills, building steady lives. Kate grew up in exactly that world. Her family was comfortably middle class. Her father owned a road construction business. Her mother focused on raising the family. Nothing about their lives suggested that one day their daughter would create one of America's most recognizable fashion brands. In many ways, that ordinary upbringing became one of Kate's greatest advantages. She never viewed fashion as a symbol of status. She viewed it as something people actually used. That difference would later separate her from much of the luxury industry. At school, she wasn't known as the loudest student, nor the most rebellious. Friends often remembered someone who observed more than she spoke, someone who paid attention, someone who noticed details other people ignored. Years later, those same habits would shape the way she designed handbags. Because good designers don't simply create beautiful products. They notice problems other people accept. After graduating from high school, Kate eventually enrolled at Arizona State University, where she studied journalism. At first, that choice seemed completely unrelated to fashion. She wasn't sketching dresses, she wasn't studying textiles, she wasn't preparing for Paris or Milan. She was learning how stories worked, how people communicated, how ideas captured attention. Ironically, those lessons would become just as valuable as anything taught in fashion school. After graduation, like thousands of ambitious young Americans during the 1980s, Kate headed east. Destination, New York City. She arrived without enormous wealth, without famous connections, without investors waiting to finance her dreams. She simply wanted an opportunity. She found one at Mademoiselle magazine. Looking back, that job changed everything. Not because it made her famous. It didn't. Not because it paid exceptionally well. It didn't. It changed her because it gave her something much more valuable: perspective. Every day, handbags crossed her desk. Luxury brands, affordable brands, classic brands, trendy brands. Some disappeared after a season. Others became icons. For years, Kate quietly watched. She studied what women carried. She listened to editors debate design. She observed which products created excitement and which were quickly forgotten. Eventually, a pattern began to emerge. The market seemed divided into two extremes. On one side were European luxury houses, beautiful, prestigious, and painfully expensive. On the other side were practical handbags that served their purpose, but inspired almost no emotion. Kate kept asking herself the same question: where was everything in between? Where was the handbag for young professional women who wanted elegance without spending a month's salary? Why did stylish design have to come with intimidating prices? The more she searched, the more convinced she became that something was missing. Most people would have accepted that reality. Kate didn't. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Great companies often begin this way, not with brilliant inventions, but with simple observations that refuse to leave someone's mind. Little by little, an idea began taking shape. Not a luxury empire, not a billion-dollar corporation, just one handbag. Simple, clean, functional. A bag someone could carry every single day without feeling ordinary. For the first time, Kate wasn't simply analyzing fashion. She was imagining how to change it. Around the same time, another relationship in her life was becoming increasingly important: Andy Spade. The two were remarkably different. Kate instinctively understood products. She cared about proportion, materials, colors, how something felt in a customer's hands. Andy approached problems from another direction. He understood advertising, branding, consumer psychology. He knew how ideas became businesses. Together, they formed a partnership neither could have built alone. At first, their conversations were casual. What if no one is making the handbag we're looking for? What would it look like? Who would buy it? Could two people with almost no experience actually build a company around one simple idea? Those conversations slowly became plans. The plans became sketches. The sketches became prototypes. Neither of them realized they were standing at the edge of something extraordinary. History often makes success look inevitable. It wasn't. There were no guarantees, no investors promising millions. No department stores waiting with contracts. Only two young people, one small apartment, and an idea they believed deserved a chance. Looking back now, it is tempting to think the handbag changed Kate Spade's life. It didn't. Thousands of designers have created beautiful handbags. Most are forgotten. The real turning point came only after the design was finished, when one simple question remained unanswered: what should they call the company? At that moment, it sounded like the easiest decision in the world. Years later, it would become the one decision that defined everything. The decision that made her famous. Every great company begins with a decision. Sometimes it's about the product. Sometimes it's about timing. Sometimes it's about money. For Kate, it was something far simpler: a name. The handbags were already beginning to take shape. The designs reflected everything she believed fashion should be: simple, useful, elegant, not loud enough to chase attention, not expensive enough to intimidate customers. She wasn't trying to compete with Paris. She wasn't trying to imitate Milan. She wanted to create something American, optimistic, fresh, approachable. For the first time, the idea no longer existed only inside her imagination. It was becoming real. There was just one problem: a company couldn't exist without a name. Like many first-time entrepreneurs, Kate started exploring possibilities. One name stood out: Alex Noel. She liked it because it created distance. If the company succeeded, wonderful. If it failed, life would go on. Kate Brosnahan would remain Kate Brosnahan. Her personal identity would stay separate from whatever happened in business. Looking back, it was an instinct rooted in caution, perhaps even wisdom. She simply didn't realize why. Andy saw things differently. Years spent working in advertising had taught him one lesson above all others: people don't remember companies, they remember stories, and nothing feels more authentic than a real person. To him, Kate Spade sounded memorable, sophisticated, modern, easy to pronounce, easy to remember. It didn't sound like a corporation. It sounded like someone you could trust. There was another reason. Although Kate designed the products, Andy believed the company belonged to both of them. Using Kate's first name together with his surname felt symbolic. A partnership, a shared dream, a shared future. The more they discussed it, the more obvious the answer seemed. Kate Spade. Two ordinary words. Neither of them had any idea those two words would eventually become worth billions of dollars. When they finally agreed, there was no dramatic celebration, no photographers, no investors applauding, no feeling that history had just been made. It was simply another item crossed off a startup checklist. Choose a name, print the labels, move on. Yet history is often shaped by moments that feel completely ordinary while they are happening. That small black label stitched inside the first handbags carried far more than a company logo. It carried Kate's identity. From that moment forward, every compliment directed toward the handbags would also strengthen the value of her name. Every satisfied customer, every magazine feature, every department store order, every fashion award, the company and the woman were growing together. At first, that relationship seemed almost perfect. Customers weren't buying from an anonymous corporation. They were buying from Kate, whether they had met her or not, whether they knew anything about her life or not. The brand felt personal. That emotional connection became one of the company's greatest competitive advantages. While established European luxury houses projected exclusivity, Kate Spade projected warmth. The handbags didn't tell customers they needed to become someone else. They suggested they were already enough. That message resonated, especially with young professional women beginning new careers. The timing could hardly have been better. During the early 1990s, more women were entering professional workplaces than ever before. Many wanted products that reflected confidence without unnecessary extravagance. Kate understood them because she was one of them. She wasn't designing for celebrities. She was designing for women catching the subway to work, women attending their first important meetings, women building lives of their own. That authenticity couldn't be manufactured. It came directly from her experiences. Orders began arriving faster than anyone expected. Then more orders, Then even more. Small retailers became larger retailers. Larger retailers introduced the brand to national audiences. Soon, buyers from prestigious department stores wanted meetings. One opportunity led to another, then another. Recognition followed. The Council of Fashion Designers of America honored the young company. Editors praised the clean silhouettes. Customers returned season after season. Something remarkable was happening. Kate Spade was no longer becoming successful. It was becoming desirable. That distinction changed everything. Success can be temporary. Desire creates loyalty. The company expanded carefully. But behind every new milestone, another transformation was taking place. The products were no longer the company's greatest asset. The name was. When customers walked into stores, many weren't asking for the black nylon handbag. They were asking for Kate Spade. When magazines recommended accessories, they weren't simply reviewing products. They were reinforcing a name. Again, and again, and again. Without realizing it, Kate had accomplished something every branding expert dreams of. She had turned a person's identity into a commercial symbol recognized across America. It was an extraordinary achievement. It was also the beginning of an extraordinary risk. Because once a name becomes valuable enough, it stops behaving like a name. It becomes an asset. Assets attract investors. Assets attract buyers. Assets are bought. Assets are sold. Years earlier, Kate believed she was choosing a logo for a small handbag company. Now that same decision was quietly transforming into one of the company's most valuable pieces of intellectual property. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. The decision that made Kate Spade famous was the very same decision that would one day separate her from her own name. She didn't know it yet. Neither did Andy. Neither did the customers carrying those first handbags through the streets of New York. All they could see was a young company experiencing extraordinary success. What they couldn't see was that every new customer, every new award, every new boutique was making one future decision increasingly inevitable. Sooner or later, someone would come asking to buy Kate Spade, and when that offer finally arrived, it would be almost impossible to refuse. The $124 million decision. By the late 1990s, Kate Spade had become something almost every entrepreneur dreams of building. A brand people didn't simply recognize, a brand people requested by name. Customers weren't buying handbags anymore, they were buying Kate Spade. The difference mattered, because products can be copied. Names cannot. Every season, demand continued growing. New retailers wanted the collection. Department stores requested larger orders. Fashion magazines praised the brand with increasing enthusiasm. Awards followed. Recognition followed. Growth followed. From the outside, it appeared unstoppable. Inside the company, however, success created an entirely different problem. Growth is expensive, much more expensive than most people imagine. Opening new boutiques required enormous capital. Manufacturing had to expand. Distribution networks had to grow. Warehouses became larger. Teams became bigger. International markets demanded even greater investment. The little company that once operated from a New York apartment was slowly becoming a corporation, and corporations require resources. For Kate and Andy, the question was no longer whether the brand could become bigger. It almost certainly could. The question was, who would pay for it? There are moments in every entrepreneur's journey when passion collides with reality. This was one of them. They could continue growing slowly, keep full control, accept fewer opportunities, or they could invite powerful investors into the company, expand faster, reach more customers, build something far larger than either of them could finance alone. Neither choice was obviously right. Neither choice was obviously wrong. Both required sacrifice. In 1999, they chose growth. The Neiman Marcus Group purchased a majority stake in the business. To most observers, the transaction looked like another brilliant milestone. The founders remained involved. The company received new resources. Expansion accelerated. Everyone appeared to benefit. And for several years, they did. Kate continued designing. Andy continued helping shape the business. Customers noticed almost no difference. The handbag still looked unmistakably Kate Spade. The optimism remained. The elegance remained. The company simply became bigger. But something invisible had changed. For the first time since the brand was created, Kate no longer owned all of Kate Spade. At first, that distinction meant very little. The company was thriving. Sales continued climbing. New product categories appeared almost every season. Shoes, jewelry, home accessories, stationery. The small handbag company had become a lifestyle empire. Ironically, every success made the business even more valuable. And valuable companies eventually attract the same question. Not, how can we help them grow, but, how much would it cost to own them? By the middle of the 2000s, another decision stood before Kate and Andy. This one was very different from the first. Years earlier, they had sold part of the company. Now, they were considering selling all of it. For entrepreneurs, this is often described as the finish line. Years of sacrifice finally become financial freedom. No more sleepless nights worrying about payroll. No more risking personal savings. No more wondering whether the business will survive another year. Just one signature, and a lifetime of security. The final agreement was extraordinary. Reports estimate that Kate ultimately received around $124 million from selling the company. $124 million. For most founders, that number represents victory. Business schools teach stories like this. Entrepreneurs dream about them. Investors spend entire careers searching for companies capable of producing them. Everything suggested Kate had achieved the perfect ending. She had built an iconic American brand. She had earned generational wealth. She was only in her 40s. She had time to do anything she wanted next. If the story had ended there, it would have become one of the greatest entrepreneurial success stories in modern fashion. Instead, it became something very different. Because hidden inside hundreds of pages of legal documents, beneath the headlines, beneath the dollar figures, beneath the celebration, was something almost nobody outside the room was talking about: the trademark, the intellectual property, the commercial rights, and one name, Kate Spade. That name no longer belonged to the founder, it belonged to the company. Legally, everything made perfect sense. A trademark is an asset. Assets are transferred during acquisitions. The law doesn't distinguish between a company named after its founder and one named after a fictional character. Ownership is ownership, but real life is rarely that simple. Phil Knight could sell Nike. He would still be Phil Knight. Howard Schultz could leave Starbucks. He would still be Howard Schultz. Kate faced a completely different reality. Her company wasn't called something separate from herself. It was her. Every success had made those two words more valuable. Every handbag, every magazine cover, every boutique, every customer. They hadn't just built a business. They had spent more than a decade turning one woman's identity into one of America's most valuable fashion trademarks. Then they sold it. Perhaps that was the moment the greatest irony of Kate Spade's life quietly began. The world believed she had gained everything: money, freedom, success. What almost nobody realized was that she had also given something away. Not just a company, not just a brand, but the professional ownership of the very name she had spent years making famous. At the time, almost no one questioned the decision. Why would they? The headlines celebrated the fortune. The business world applauded another remarkable exit. Friends congratulated the couple. Everything looked exactly as success was supposed to look. Only years later, after the brand became worth billions, would people begin asking a very different question. What is the true value of a name once it no longer belongs to the person who created it? Watching the world wear her name. For a while, everything seemed exactly as Kate had hoped. She stepped away from the company. The business continued growing. She finally had something she had rarely experienced during the previous decade: time. Time away from endless meetings. Time away from production schedules. Time away from investor expectations. After years of building one of America's fastest-growing fashion brands, she could finally breathe. Most entrepreneurs never reach that point. Kate had. She had the fortune, she had the reputation, she had freedom, or so it seemed. Because while Kate was building a quieter life, another version of Kate Spade was becoming louder than ever. The company expanded at a remarkable pace. More stores, more countries, more collections. What had once been known primarily for handbags gradually transformed into a complete lifestyle brand. There were shoes, jewelry, home accessories, fragrances, ready-to-wear collections. Every year, the logo appeared in more places. Every year, more people discovered the brand. Ironically, the farther Kate moved away from the company, the more famous her name became. It was everywhere. Shopping malls, luxury department stores, airport boutiques, magazine advertisements, window displays. If someone had walked through Manhattan during those years, they could have passed multiple Kate Spade stores without realizing something extraordinary. The woman called Kate Spade wasn't inside any of them. She wasn't approving new collections. She wasn't selecting fabrics. She wasn't deciding the colors for next season. She wasn't attending design meetings. The stores carried her name, not her voice. That distinction became larger every year. Most customers never noticed. Why would they? The logo still looked the same. The shopping bags still said Kate Spade. The advertisements still celebrated the same cheerful optimism the brand had always projected. To millions of shoppers, nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, everything had. Creative directors came and went. Executives made strategic decisions. Marketing teams reshaped the brand for a changing generation of consumers. Every corporation evolves. Every successful brand eventually becomes larger than any one individual. From a business perspective, that was exactly what shareholders wanted. From a personal perspective, it created a strange kind of silence. Imagine hearing your own name spoken thousands of times every day, while realizing almost none of those conversations have anything to do with you anymore. That was Kate's new reality. People believed they knew her. In truth, they knew the corporation. Perhaps the most painful part wasn't that the company had changed. Every company changes. Perhaps it was that she could no longer change it. The identity she had spent years building was now moving in directions she could neither guide nor stop. Then came another announcement, another acquisition, another celebration. In 2017, the Kate Spade brand was acquired once again, this time for more than $2.4 billion. Business newspapers praised the deal. Financial analysts called it another brilliant acquisition. The numbers dominated the headlines. Billions, growth, expansion, global recognition. It looked like one of the greatest success stories in modern American retail. Yet hidden beneath those headlines was one question almost nobody asked. Where was Kate? Not the logo, not the company, the woman. The answer was surprisingly simple. She was watching, just like everyone else. She wasn't negotiating the sale. She wasn't attending board meetings. She wasn't signing contracts. She wasn't receiving billions. She wasn't even receiving millions. The woman whose name had become one of the company's most valuable assets had no ownership left in it. There is something deeply unsettling about that reality. Imagine building a house, spending years choosing every brick, every window, every detail, then selling it. Years later, someone renovates the house into a palace worth 10 times more. People still call it your house, but you no longer have a key. That was Kate's relationship with her own name. Eventually, she reached a decision. If she couldn't return to Kate Spade, she would simply begin again. A new company was born, Francis Valentine. The choice of name was deeply personal. It honored family rather than commerce, memory rather than marketing. This time, the name belonged entirely to her. She designed with the same curiosity that had defined the beginning of her career. Color remained important. Joy remained important. Optimism remained important. The work still reflected her personality. Critics admired the collections. Longtime customers were delighted to see Kate creating again. But there was one competitor Francis Valentine could never escape: Kate Spade. Every interview began in almost the same way. The founder of Kate Spade. Every article returned to the same story. Every headline compared the new company with the old one. No matter what Kate created, the conversation always drifted backward. The world refused to let her become anyone other than the woman who had once built Kate Spade. It was a strange paradox. Most people spend their lives hoping to leave behind a lasting legacy. Kate had one. Yet that very legacy became impossible to step outside. The success that had once opened every door now quietly followed her into every room. Perhaps this was never really a story about losing a company. Perhaps it was about losing the freedom to define yourself beyond your greatest success. By the middle of the 2010s, the contrast had become impossible to ignore. One version of Kate Spade existed inside boardrooms, financial reports, and luxury boutiques around the world. The other woke up each morning trying to build something new, while carrying the weight of a name that no longer truly belonged to her professional life. The brand had become stronger than ever. The woman behind it was becoming harder for the world to see, and while customers continued celebrating the colorful world that bore her name, very few realized that, behind the scenes, Kate herself was entering the most difficult chapter of her life. When the brand lived on. By 2018, there were two versions of Kate Spade. One was impossible to miss. The other had become almost invisible. The first lived inside brightly lit boutiques. It smiled from glossy advertising campaigns. It appeared on shopping bags carried through airports, shopping districts, and city streets around the world. Every season, new collections arrived. Every season, new customers discovered the brand. It seemed unstoppable. The second version of Kate Spade lived far away from that world. There were no opening ceremonies, no magazine covers, no billion-dollar headlines, only a woman trying to build a quieter life after spending years at the center of one of fashion's greatest success stories. To the public, it looked as though she had everything: money, recognition, freedom, the kind of legacy most designers spend an entire career chasing. But public success and private peace have never been the same thing. Those closest to Kate would later describe someone who had been living with depression and anxiety for many years. She sought treatment. She worked with doctors. She continued trying to manage an illness that affects people from every profession, every background, and every level of success. There is a dangerous myth that extraordinary achievement somehow protects people from emotional pain. Kate's story reminds us that it does not. A fortune cannot silence anxiety. Recognition cannot erase loneliness, and success cannot always quiet the battles that take place entirely out of public view. At the same time, another chapter of her life had quietly changed. For decades, Kate and Andy had built almost everything together. Not just a company, a partnership, a shared purpose, a future imagined side by side. After leaving the business, that shared purpose naturally evolved. Their lives began moving in different directions. In the months before Kate's death, they were living separately, while remaining connected as parents and continuing to communicate. From the outside, it was easy for people to invent dramatic stories. Real life is often less dramatic and far more complicated. Relationships change, people grow, families adapt. None of us can fully understand what another person is carrying simply by looking from the outside. Perhaps that is one of the quiet lessons hidden inside Kate's story. We often confuse visibility with understanding. The whole world recognized her name. Very few people truly knew how she was feeling. Even as she launched Frances Valentine and returned to designing, comparisons never stopped. Every interview led back to the same subject: Kate Spade. Every profile introduced her the same way. The founder of Kate Spade, no matter how determined she was to create something new, the past remained only a single question away. It is difficult to begin a second chapter when the world refuses to stop reading the first. Then came June 5, 2018. The news spread across New York within hours. Soon it reached every major newspaper, every television network, every fashion publication. Kate Spade had died at the age of 55. The reaction was immediate. Designers paused to remember the woman who had transformed the American handbag. Former colleagues spoke about her generosity and creativity. Customers shared photographs of handbags they had carried for years. For many women, a Kate Spade bag was more than an accessory. It marked a first promotion, a graduation, a birthday, the beginning of a career. Without realizing it, millions of people had connected pieces of their own lives to something she had created. In the days that followed, Andy Spade released a statement asking for privacy and explaining that Kate had been living with depression and anxiety while receiving treatment. His message was simple: do not reduce her life to the way it ended. Remember the life she lived. That may be the most important distinction of all. It is tempting to search for a single explanation, to point to one business decision, one relationship, one turning point, one moment. Life is rarely that simple. No documentary, no headline, and no biography can honestly claim to know every reason behind another person's private struggles. What we do know is enough. Kate Spade changed an industry. She built a company that outgrew almost everyone's expectations. She inspired countless designers to believe that elegance could be colorful, practical, and joyful. That legacy remains. So does another. Her story reminds us that success is never the full picture. Behind every famous name is a human being. Behind every admired brand is someone carrying hopes, fears, disappointments, and questions invisible to the public. Perhaps that is the image worth remembering, not the billion-dollar acquisitions, not the contracts, not the headlines, but a designer sitting at a table in a small New York apartment, sketching a handbag she hoped women would love. She could never have imagined where that sketch would lead. She could never have imagined that one day millions of people would know her name, or that in time the name itself would become larger than the woman who first wrote it. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The Kate Spade brand never stopped growing. The stores never stopped opening. The handbags never stopped selling. The name continued traveling around the world. But the woman who gave that name its meaning was no longer there to see where the journey would end. Conclusion. At the beginning of this story, we asked a question that seemed almost impossible. How can someone lose ownership of their own name? By now, we know the answer. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens one decision at a time. One label, one company, one contract, one signature. Until one day, the name the world recognizes no longer belongs to the person who made it famous. For many people, Kate Spade's story will always be remembered as a remarkable business success, and in many ways, it absolutely was. A young woman from a middle-class family built one of America's most influential fashion brands. She changed the handbag industry. She inspired an entire generation of designers. She proved that elegance didn't have to come from Paris or Milan. It could come from a small apartment in New York. It could come from someone who simply understood how ordinary women wanted to live. Very few entrepreneurs ever build something that lasts. Kate did. Even today, years after her passing, the brand continues to grow. New collections are released. New customers discover it every day. The logo still hangs above boutiques around the world. From a business perspective, it is exactly what every successful company hopes to become. A brand capable of surviving its founder. There is nothing unusual about that. History is filled with companies that outlived the people who created them. What makes Kate Spade different is that the company carried her identity from the very beginning. Most founders eventually leave their businesses. Kate left a part of herself inside hers. That is why her story continues to resonate so deeply. Not because she sold a company. Thousands of entrepreneurs have done that. Not because she became wealthy. Many founders have. And not because the brand was later worth billions. Corporate history is filled with stories like that. People remember Kate Spade because her success created a question that has no easy answer. Where does a brand end? And where does the person begin? Perhaps that question matters today more than ever. We live in a world where entrepreneurs are encouraged to become brands. Artists become brands. Athletes become brands. Influencers become brands. Even ordinary people are told to build a personal brand. The line between identity and business grows thinner every year. Kate Spade's story reminds us that there is extraordinary power in attaching your name to something meaningful. But it also reminds us that names carry a different weight than products. A company can be sold, a building can be sold, a trademark can be sold, yet our identity has a value that cannot be measured on a balance sheet. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden beneath all the headlines about billion-dollar acquisitions and fashion empires. Success is not only about what we build, it is also about what we choose to keep. When people hear the name Kate Spade today, most immediately picture handbags, bright colors, elegant shapes, playful sophistication. Few stop to think about the woman who first imagined them. Perhaps that is understandable. Brands are designed to outlive memories, but behind every famous brand, there is always a human story, one filled with uncertainty, risk, hope, sacrifice, and sometimes consequences no one could have predicted. In the end, Kate Spade's greatest achievement wasn't creating a handbag. It wasn't building a billion-dollar brand. It wasn't even changing American fashion. Her greatest achievement was proving that a simple idea, executed with honesty, creativity, and conviction, could change an industry. That legacy cannot be bought, it cannot be licensed, and it cannot be transferred through a corporate acquisition. It belongs to the woman who imagined it long before the world knew her name. Perhaps that is the image worth leaving with. Not the boardrooms, not the contracts, not the billions of dollars, but a young designer sitting in a small New York apartment, holding the first handbag she truly believed in. She had no idea that the tiny label stitched inside would one day become one of the most recognizable names in fashion. She had no idea that millions of women would carry it. She had no idea that investors would value it in the billions. And she certainly had no idea that one day the world would know her name better than it knew her. Because in the end, the greatest irony of Kate Spade's life was never that she sold her company. It was that the company kept growing, while the woman behind the name quietly disappeared from it. Sometimes the most valuable thing we ever create isn't a product, it's a part of ourselves. And perhaps that is the one thing no price can truly replace.